Their eyes, when they have them or haven't lost them, are bottomless abysses that watch you with the gaze of those who have stared into darkness on alert for far too long. All the creatures you are going to see today live on the same planet as us, and yet they are definitely not from the same world. Because everything evolves in one of the most inhospitable environments we know, in the abyss, where sunlight never reaches. And yet, these living beings have managed to find amazing solutions to conquer and adapt to these cold hells. And where, sometimes at several thousand meters deep, the pressure on every square centimeter of surface is equivalent to that of an elephant walking in high heels on one of your fingernails. During this journey toward the dark depths of sunless realms, we will observe strange creatures, red, black, or orange. Some are equipped with deformed and monstrous organs, or have extendable jaws that allow them to swallow prey twice as large as themselves. Others have eyes on top of their heads to see danger coming, or are completely without them. And we'll save the best for last, because that's where the world's deepest fish awaits us, one of the toughest, the snailfish. But before we go and discover the original and often truly mind-blowing solutions that abyssal species have found to adapt to the terrible hostility of their environment, give me 30 seconds to refresh your memory about the scale of the challenge they have to overcome. In all the oceans of the world, below 200 meters deep, sunlight is already nothing more than a distant memory. A faint glow that keeps fading as you go deeper into darker and darker waters. Eventually, it completely disappears around 1,000 meters. Beyond that, in the midnight zone, a dizzying plunge into darkness begins. Total darkness, only occasionally disturbed by bioluminescent organisms. And the water temperature has stabilized. It's very cold, around 4 degrees. To these already terrible conditions, there's the added fact that food is becoming increasingly scarce. Because beyond 200 meters deep, due to the lack of light, no plant is able to survive. So, in the abyss, all creatures depend for survival on organic matter, which is continuously formed in the sunlit upper layers. And only a very small part of it ends up slowly sinking, swirling down to the bottom, in the form of a strange marine snow. A snow which, along with the fall of carcasses into the deep sea, is the only continuous source of nutrients for all the inhabitants of the abyss, whether they feed on it directly or prey on those who eat it. I've painted a picture for you. Notice that it's extremely dark and bleak. And yet, life has managed to turn this nightmare vision into a little corner of paradise. First of all, just to be able to feed themselves in this vast food desert, many species have drastically altered their anatomy, behavior, and physiology. And while some species continuously collect suspended organic matter, others, which are unable to take advantage of this snow, and for whom feeding opportunities are rare, they have developed extendable jaws and stomachs that allow them to ingest truly enormous prey. This allows them to store reserves for months or even years. At depths of 1,000 to 3,000 meters, you can find one of the most astonishing creatures. Because this strange fish has the appearance of a black balloon, known as the gulper eel, and sometimes also called the pelican eel. It is capable, when the opportunity arises, of swallowing several times its own weight in a single bite. And if you don't find this curled-up species impressive, just give it a few more seconds, enough time for it to open its mouth and double its size by spreading out in front of the camera. With an oversized jaw and a stomach that, to envelop its victim, can stretch to proportions beyond comprehension. Overall, when you live in the deep sea, one of the keys to survival is being able to eat anything, if possible, in large quantities and whenever the opportunity arises. The diet of lizardfish could be summed up like this: anything that happens to pass by, because these solitary predators, with their predatory grins, often lie in wait at the bottom, ambushing anything living that dares to come near them. They go after fish, squid, octopus, crabs, as well as dead animals, and even members of their own species. Impressive amphipods, almost 40 centimeters long, inhabit depths exceeding 6,000 meters in abyssal trenches. They are capable, after sometimes going months or even years without eating, of swallowing as much as their own body weight in just a few hours. When by chance a carcass appears, a diet that would probably quickly cause their surface-dwelling counterparts to die of indigestion. These giant crustaceans are like sea cucumbers, there to remind us that we should never judge a species' resilience by its appearance. Shout out to the panda. Among the thriving wildlife, deep-sea crustaceans can consume nearly anything that reaches the ocean floor. There are even some that have taken their evolution so far that they are able to feed on decaying wood, which, by chance, sank all the way down there. As for this ogrefish, with its skeletal tail and strange protruding spines, here it is captured by an autonomous submarine from the Mbari Institute's research teams. Not only does it have skin covered with a network of hypersensitive receptors that allow it to detect the slightest movement of water around it. It also has an oversized jaw equipped with sharp fangs, which allows it to feed on anything that can fit into its mouth. In fact, in proportion to their body size, ogrefish have the longest teeth in the animal kingdom, some of which are so long that these species have a small cavity on each side of their brain to slide them into when they close their mouths. In short, they're not picky eaters. Seizing opportunities is undoubtedly beneficial for overcoming the difficulties of inhabiting and enduring in the deep sea. And since eating is a luxury here, in order to save energy, creatures living in the abyss often move in slow motion. Drifting slowly, silently, in the darkness, they've learned to take advantage of the currents, and their movements are almost always slow and unhurried. Except when the situation, such as a sudden opportunity to eat or the need to avoid a predator, requires them to use all their strength to fight or flee. In order to make the most of the currents that become stronger just a few meters above the seafloor, tripod fish have found a radical solution. They perch on their modified pectoral fin, shaped like a stilts, and wait with their mouths above the seafloor without needing to swim, so that the small crustaceans they feed on pass nearby for them to gulp down. Thus, perched on the ocean floor, resting on their fin, these fish have found a way to hunt with minimal effort. When you live in the abyss, and you're not one of the organisms that feed exclusively on detritus, a veil of marine snow that manages to reach the great depths. So to feed yourself in these vast expanses, you have to manage to find something to eat. And for that, many species living near the bottom have developed a particularly sharp sense of smell, which allows them to locate and track their meal. This fish, with its unlikely fenwick-like appearance, has abandoned the concept of swimming. And now they use these modified fins to walk on the seafloor, or with the help of strange whisker-shaped appendages equipped with taste buds, they try to flush out prey buried in the sediment. As for Bathynomus giganteus, these giant isopods that can reach the size of a small dog, they are equipped with antennae that allow them to detect the scent of decomposing bodies. And so, they roam the deep sea floor toward the carcasses of fish that may have sunk nearby. That's why these colossal scavenger crustaceans are often found on whale carcasses stranded on the abyssal plain. Depending on the carcass's decomposition stage, they may be joined by numerous sea cucumbers and other deep-sea octopuses also lured by the scent. Of all the fish with a strong sense of smell, one of the most iconic species is certainly the chimera. This strange, ghostly fish with smooth, scaleless skin that seems to almost fly a few meters above the deep ocean floor is certainly one of the weirdest creatures you can find in the abyss. Measuring just over a meter long and abundant in all the world's oceans, between 200 and 4,000 meters deep, chimera fish have clearly been given all sorts of names. It must be said that with their wing-shaped pectoral fins, which they flap to glide through the water, their long streamlined tails resembling those of felines, and their rodent-like teeth, and their skin, which in some species looks as if it has been recently stitched together. To piece together parts of a puzzle coming from different animals, chimeras can be quite disconcerting. If you add to that the fact that these cartilaginous fish with large reflective eyes belong to the only group of fish that have real nostrils, that their bodies are partly lined with millions of cells similar to taste buds, capable of literally tasting the current and identifying a potential prey from several hundred meters away, and that some species of chimeras have a large venomous spine that allows them to defend themselves in case of an attack from above. And do you understand why we can definitely inscribe their name on the front of buildings dedicated to fantastic animals? That one there is a species of long-nosed chimera that has a disproportionate snout, which has practically turned into a kind of trunk. A trunk covered with nerve and sensory endings. And just like the line you see running along its body, it's sensitive to changes in electric fields and to vibrations that travel through the water. This allows it to detect the movements of creatures buried in the sandy bottoms that it feeds on. In fact, chimera fish seem to have found such effective ways to survive in the abyssal conditions that we find fossil specimens almost identical to those living today and dated to several tens of millions of years ago. You have certainly noticed that many of the species from the great depths that we have observed so far are depigmented, pale, or completely black. Which seems perfectly logical. What's the point of having a color when no one can see it? Except that these adaptations only apply to those who spend their lives in the midnight zone and beyond, where sunlight has completely and permanently disappeared. But for species that occasionally venture above 1,000 meters, it's different. Because within what is called the twilight zone, a faint thread of sunlight, impossible for human eyes to distinguish, still manages to make its way through. And the residual presence of this faint light causes, in this deep twilight, a cascade of adaptations. Thus, to avoid ending up on someone else's menu, animals that live or venture into the twilight zone often try by any means to visually disappear. In this zone of the deep ocean, we find a strange menagerie of worms. Transparent animals include jellyfish, ctenophores, and siphonophores. But also, more surprisingly, marine mollusks such as this crystal-like octopus, or these squids that are almost completely transparent and lacking venom or armor, try to go unnoticed in the open sea by letting up to 90% of light pass through their bodies. On the other hand, instead of letting it pass through, some species try to completely absorb the little light that may hit them. And when they aren't transparent, almost all living creatures in this region of the deep ocean have chosen skins with red or black shades. While choosing black to blend into this world of darkness seems like the most obvious choice, choosing red might be a bit less so. But at such depths, the light waves responsible for this color can't make their way through. So, without red light to reflect, the bodies of animals that have chosen this color appear absolutely black in the absence of beams, spotlights, or rovers. This dragonfish has a glowing lure hanging from its chin. Having skin that absorbs as much light as possible is a vital necessity, since it has to hide while being close to the light source that allows it to attract its prey. Many deep and dark water fish, some of which you see here captured by the teams of the M. Barry Institute, have, in their constant quest for stealth, perfected their camouflage. They even have transparent teeth, and some even have fangs made of a truly unique mineral, a crystal whose atomic structure lets light pass through perfectly. Attempting to swallow oversized prey is risky for predators. Some deep-sea fish, with elastic stomachs and fangs so long they almost look like prison bars, have already been spotted, with their mouths blocked by a victim impaled and stuck on their oversized teeth. So much so that the fish in question, unable to get rid of it, most likely ended up starving to death in front of its last meal. In this abyssal twilight, where blue wavelengths diffusing from the upper layers can outline the shadows and contours of bodies, many creatures, in order to remain as unnoticed as possible, use a technique called counter-illumination, which allows them to hide their silhouette from predators, moving below using photophores directed downward, which they can adjust in intensity to match their shade so that they can't be distinguished by contrast with the lighter layers above them. And you can even encounter cephalopods such as Vampiratotus infernalis in the twilight zone. They are able to detect the movement of potential predators coming from the upper water layers using photoreceptors located above their heads. And to counter all these ancient creatures, masters in the art of camouflage, others have developed sharp vision. When the teams from the Mbari Institute first shone the lights of their autonomous rover, a 20-centimeter-long fish hangs motionless in the pitch-black depths of the deep sea at night, and who seemed to be looking at them with its two small sad eyes surrounded by drooping lids. They immediately realized they were dealing with something unlike anything known. First of all, the two small spots on the front of this baffling fish's head, which seem to be facing forward, are not its eyes. In reality, the eyeballs of Magropina microstomi are those two green orbs, which, protected behind an astonishing transparent cavity, point upward toward the surface. So, the first time a rover came face to face with it, this strange fish might not have even seen the submarine. It is believed that this species ended up with two large bulbous eyes, protected inside a sheath filled with a kind of gelatinous liquid. It's so it can distinguish above it the slightest drops of light that manage, with difficulty, to make their way through. A path through the twilight abyss, down to the depths of 600 to 800 meters where this fish lives. and thus be able to detect the passage of small crustaceans, whose presence is revealed by their dark movements, making the faint residual sunlight from above shimmer. At these great depths, there are also many fish that, to counter the hypervision developed by certain species, instead of letting light pass through, reflect it back. This camouflage method, called silvering, involves covering themselves with scales that, like thousands of tiny mirrors, reflect the light and give them a silvery tint. Caught by the headlights of a submersible from the Schmidt Association Institute, these saberfish are almost entirely covered with skin so reflective that it makes them shine with a polished steel gray. And in a completely counterintuitive way, this amazing ability to reflect and diffuse light allows the species that use it to disappear from the sight of their predators. Alongside this game of hide-and-seek and constant countermeasures, always trying to find or disappear, some deep-sea dwellers are able to produce their own light through bioluminescence. And these magical displays allow them to communicate, attract mates or prey, lure, intimidate, see temporarily, repel predators, frighten, or dazzle to make their escape. In fact, 90% of animals living in deep water can, at one time or another, produce light. And the fact that so many creatures are able to act like fleeting fireflies and momentarily break the darkness of the abyss explains why so many species living in the deepest depths still have extremely sensitive eyes. While one might be tempted to think that there is absolutely nothing left to see. Thus, even beyond 1,000 meters deep, where no ray of sunlight can reach, the darkness is sometimes briefly illuminated by 1,000 lights. Here, no one ever really closes their eyes, especially since cephalopods and fish don't have eyelids. Their eyes constantly open, they endlessly stare into the surrounding absolute darkness, in search of the appearance of a light emitted by a creature that could feed them, or of a lure that draws them toward a doorway to hell, a mouth. For those who live on the ocean floor and are neither transparent, nor fast, nor particularly skilled at staying discreet or blending into the environment, survival often depends on disguise. The best way is to look like other species that aren't particularly known for their taste or nutritional value. Thus, young swordtail squids have been observed imitating the appearance of siphonophores. These creatures are mostly made of water and are often dangerously stinging, which usually makes almost everyone ignore them. Many species of crabs living in the abyss are also known for their habit of making a kind of second skin using the skin of others. When an area lacks any relief that could offer protection, some move around with pieces of sponge or coral on their heads to avoid being detected. This one built himself extra armor at little cost by sticking a colony of corals onto his back. This allows him to better protect himself from dangers coming from above. It can also function as a parachute, by the way. Others, like sumo crabs for example, use it to protect themselves from potential attacks coming from above. A whole bunch of venomous animals that they carry on their backs. And so, anemones or jellyfish end up serving, probably against their will, as a shield. As for hermit crabs, recognizable by their long legs, whose elongated segments are incredibly effective for moving across the soft mud that covers the bottom. They are known for regularly carrying on their backs a shell that hosts a venomous anemone. This stinging gelatinous armor allows them to protect themselves from octopus attacks. And if this species seems to move with one pair of legs less, this pair is actually used to securely fasten the anemone onto its back. Overall, many creatures that are not able to travel long distances to find food adopt ambush predator techniques and let their prey come to them. That's the case for deep-sea halibut, which spend much of their lives lying on the seafloor, slightly buried, in order to try to surprise their prey. And they've even gone so far as to have both eyes on the same side. Strangely, in these fish that look like they've run into a door, the eyeballs are on either side of the animal's body at birth. And it's only as they grow that these fish will see their eyes migrate to the same side. I really have a hard time believing that isn't painful. The bright side of things, being a halibut, or the flip side if you prefer, is that your whole face is necessarily on your best side. And with that absolutely questionable joke, I think it's time to go meet the deepest fish in the world ever filmed. These pale, scaleless, and depigmented creatures with their tiny eyes and heads resembling translucent tadpoles are absolutely extraordinary. Because this scene takes place at 8,336 meters deep, precisely in the Izu-Ogasawara Trench, southeast of Japan, at the level of a Hadal zone, a subduction region where the ocean floor sinks even deeper than the abyssal plain, which is generally located between 4,000 and 6,000 meters deep. Despite the hostile environment named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, and where the water temperature now approaches the freezing point, you probably noticed it, it's even obvious. Here too, there is life, gigantic crustaceans and fish. The ones you're looking at right now are the deepest in the world, the snailfish. In a counterintuitive way, and even though the height of the water column above these creatures is quite deep, about the same as 25 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other, the problem for survival here isn't really the pressure exerted on their bodies. Because snailfish, like all fish from very great depths for that matter, don't have a swim bladder. And by doing so, their bodies, which are made up mostly of incompressible fluids, don't get crushed. Even though they live here under a pressure 330 times higher than at the surface. In fact, even at the deepest point of the ocean, at Challenger Deep, more than 10,900 meters down, life still manages to thrive. And to replace this air-filled sac, which at shallower depths allows them to adjust their buoyancy and which they had to get rid of. Many deep-sea fish, just like squids or sharks for that matter, have a layer under their skin made of a kind of gelatin, lighter than seawater, which allows them to become lighter. Inside the crystalline body of some glass squids, there is even a chamber filled with an ammonia solution, which, being less dense than their environment, allows them to improve their buoyancy. There are also fish that accumulate oils lighter than seawater in their liver, and cephalopods that secrete fresh water from their kidneys while expelling the salty and denser water from their bodies. All of this each time is to achieve almost neutral buoyancy. In fact, if there are so many deep-sea species that go to such lengths to float effortlessly, it's because here, as we've said, knowing how to save your energy as much as possible is one of the keys to the battle for survival. Because the main problem in the Adal zone, just like on the abyssal plain, is that you're starving there. Here, it's dark, it's cold, and there's famine. That's why, when the autonomous rovers drop bait to attract and study the species present in the area, the bait is very quickly covered with living creatures. As for the snailfish, to live buried so deep in the abyss, they've traded their muscles for something with a consistency closer to gelatin than flesh. Even the bones of these fish have a mutation that prevents the calcification of cartilage, and they have ended up becoming soft and flabby. In fact, after millions of years evolving at great depths, only the bones of their inner ear and their teeth are still hard. So they can build a body at a lower cost made up of a kind of jelly that is extremely rich in water and low in proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. This tendency to become softer and softer as you go deeper is not unique to the snail. Many deep-sea fish have their bone structure reduced to a minimum, their scales disappear, and their internal skeleton is replaced by cartilage that is much more flexible and soft, in parallel with their descent into the abyss. The liquefaction of animals is due to the decreasing calcium content in water, which is crucial for building the hard parts of vertebrates. The deeper you venture, in other words, building a skeleton or a shell always requires more energy in the abyss than on the surface. But energy is exactly what's lacking here. These images, captured at over 8,300 meters deep, are extraordinary, because they were filmed near what is probably, for all fish, an impassable boundary. In fact, it is believed that it is strictly impossible for vertebrates to survive beyond 8,400 meters deep. While, for example, you can still find a few rare crustaceans there, because all vertebrates have a fluid in their cells, the osmolyte, which is necessary to counterbalance the external pressure. But beyond 8,400 meters deep, the capabilities of this fluid reach their limits, making survival impossible for fish. This theory also seems to be confirmed by the fact that no vertebrate has ever been observed beyond that depth, even though they live at shallower depths than snailfish. The sluggish grenadiers frequently found between 2,000 and 6,000 meters deep. They also have, just like me, a body with extremely little muscle. And their movements, when they are not meant for hunting or avoiding being hunted, are often slow and calculated. These fish, with huge eyes and elongated tails, can grow up to 1.5 meters long and are among the most plentiful in the depths of the world's oceans, where they, just like chimeras, spend much of their lives swimming near the bottom, searching for mollusks, crustaceans, worms, and other fish. Having mastered the art of conserving energy and often forced to travel great distances to find food, grenadiers are able to survive for 5 months without eating. Often collateral victims of deep-sea trawling, these soft-bodied creatures, when caught, almost always end up as fish meal when they are not simply thrown back overboard, invariably left for dead. Like all deep-sea creatures, grenadiers cannot survive the pressure drop when brought to the surface. And amongst all the ingenious adaptations that allow survival in the abyss, the most impressive are certainly those associated with reproduction. I'll share a few with you to give you an idea. This captivating anglerfish species, filmed by Rubikoff Foundation researchers, is encircled by lengthy filaments that enable it to sense the tiniest water movements nearby. Interestingly, it's not a single creature, but two that have recently merged. If you look closely, you can see, attached to this female about 30 centimeters long, a much smaller male that has latched onto her body, and he will never leave her. Because for anglerfish living in the deep sea, it's often difficult to find a mate in the vastness that surrounds them. And when the tiny males finally manage to find, thanks to their highly developed sense of smell, a female in the darkness, they attach their mouths to her and then let all their organs, including their eyes, atrophy. From their bodies, now nourished by the females, the only organs still functioning are those used to produce sex gametes. And so they will spend the rest of their short existence attached as a source of sperm. In other words, for male anglerfish, the pleasures of love quickly turn into the pains of death. However, for most marine animals, whether near the surface or in the deep sea, fish and invertebrates have often made love without touching each other, which, let's admit it, is a little bit lame. To reproduce, they simply release sperm and eggs into the water. Some species, such as Catenophores, are even hermaphrodites and can reproduce all by themselves, while those in the abyss need to touch each other to reproduce, have learned to cope with the rarity of encounters. Thus, many octopuses, squids, or chimeras are able, after mating, to store their partner's sperm for a long time, while waiting for their eggs to be ready for fertilization. As for lizardfish, they are synchronous hermaphrodites, meaning they have both male and female organs, allowing them to mate with any member of their species. In short, here, the cold, the oppressive darkness, and the lack of food have ultimately given rise to a world unlike any other. A strange and wonderful world, filled with a joyful mix of creatures with curious shapes and unexpected behaviors. Here you find translucent, opaque, or transparent bodies, eyes that are too small or too large, or even completely absent, as if they had vanished, leaving behind two large gaping holes hollowed out from staring too long into the void. And whether they are slow or fast, equipped with thick armor or mostly made of jelly, each species of the deep sea has its own reason for being. Everyone has successfully transformed this hellish place into their own little paradise, regardless of the weapons and methods developed for attacking, defending, disappearing, or spying. In this escalation of possibilities, there are millions of ways to survive. I've left out the vast majority of them. So yes, I could have. Maybe I should have told you about those who, blind, find their way by detecting low-frequency sound waves. Or even mention those extraordinary shrimp whose gigantic antennae allow them to detect the slightest variations in pressure or movement in the water around them. But that doesn't really matter, because even in these waters, where the temperature is around 4 degrees, it's often a cold war. In the end, there is never really a winner. No one here is an undisputed master. All these adaptations are, in their own way, the best. Within their ecological niche, they together form a structure of interdependence, mutual interests and indifferences, with a precarious and ever-evolving balance. The simple fact that they can exist in these deep, cold, high-pressure environments where sunlight never reaches. So many creatures of unsuspected beauty remind us of the extraordinary adaptability of living beings while acting as a flash of light in the darkness. An invitation to exploration. And considering the vast expanses of darkness we have yet to explore, I think it's safe to say that some of the greatest discoveries yet to come reside in the deep ocean. In terms of the bizarre and the wonderful. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it and subscribing. You can also support me on Tipeee and find short formats like the life expectancy of a dead fish on my Instagram.